Thank you, Phil, for agreeing to come and have a chat with us about yourself. Maybe we could just start and ask you that very question. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Phillip Mitchell. Been a social worker. I've been qualified now for 25 years, but I've worked in social services for almost 30. My background, my ethnic background, is that my father is white English, was in the British Army, and he met my mum whilst he was stationed in Guyana, which is on the very top of South America, kind of tucked in between Brazil and Venezuela. It's a British colony, or was a British colony, I say. So he met her while he was out in the army, and they got married. And I was born in Germany, raised in Germany, didn't come to the UK until I was 13 years old. So I spent all of my childhood, young childhood, in Germany, move-in house, move-in barracks every 18 months, which is, or at the time at least, is fairly typical for army families. And then we came to London, to West London, when I was 13, as I say, and that was the longest period I spent anywhere. So as a teenager, I grew up in West London.
Thank you. Phil, the term BAME is much used in the current climate that we're living in, but I'm aware that not everyone is keen on that terminology. How would you identify your identity, and how would you prefer to be referred to?
I suppose that's an interesting one. I'm one of those people who doesn't like BAME, as it's become known, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. It's become a catch-all term, and I don't think it really accounts for the diversity of identities out there. And when I was thinking about this prior to this interview, Meryl, I was thinking, I'm not entirely sure what my identity was, or I wasn't for quite a while. My identity was shaped by my experiences growing up. So because of everything that happened to me, to my family, growing up on army bases in Germany and then in London, we came over to London just at the time that the riots were starting, and there was a lot of anger, I suppose, on the streets. But I can remember being as a child being called Packy, being called Little Black Sambo, being called Nignog, Chocky Drop, being told to go home, and those kind of things. So you kind of very quickly realize you're different, and that you don't belong. You don't belong with all those white kids, and on a couple of occasions their parents as well. You said a few things. So that tells you that, okay, I'm not white. But by the same token, as I got a little bit older, I realized I'm not Asian, in the sense that I know very little about that culture. I don't have the language. The part of London that we moved to is very close to a large Indian, predominantly Sikh community. Well, I certainly wasn't the same as that. I didn't understand those cultural mores or values, language, as I say. My mum being from Guyana, from the Caribbean, we used to go to Shepherd's Bush market. We spent a lot of time in Shepherd's Bush, where there's a very large what was called West Indian community. So I felt more at home there, but then again looked very different. So I kind of just define my identity as mixed race. And consciously toyed with the words half caste for a while, because that was a few of the names that was called at me. But then I began to learn how that term was derived, what caste meant, and the hierarchy that involved, and it being quite a pejorative term. So these days, I kind of define myself as mixed race, I guess, and that's certainly what I tick on the boxes on forms, job applications. I know the census is coming round again soon, so that's probably the one that I'll go for this time round. So yeah, mixed race, I think I am. I'm neither one nor the other. I kind of straddle that narrow line down the middle, and I'm able to dip in and out of both.
Thanks, Phil. That's interesting to hear all that. You clearly became a social worker, as you said earlier on. What was your motivation behind becoming a social worker? Did it link in with your identity and the experiences you faced growing up in different countries?
If I'm honest, it didn't consciously at the time. I left school at 16. I sailed through my O levels without bragging. I got a load of O levels. And then some switch went off in my brain that seemed to make me not interested in studying or following the same path that I had before. Prior to that, I had plans of becoming a doctor. But it turned out that you had to do 3 sciences and be good at maths. And yeah, they're quite difficult actually at A level. So I flunked my A levels. It took me over 3 years to finally scrape through with 2 A levels. But what I was really interested at the time was drama. Managed to get myself a place at drama school. So I had huge plans to be an actor. Went to drama school, and it sounds very stupid, but I discovered that posh girls at the time liked little mixed race boys from West London. And without going into any gory details, I had a whale of a time.
Yeah, sounds like you probably did then, yeah.
I did, but at the expense of my studies at drama school. And I say studies because one of the things they absolutely was their bottom line. We had to do an academic module as well to kind of give us a bit of grounding, something to fall back on. And I'd chosen sociology. Partly, I think I've got to be honest, because it seemed like the easier one, and partly, I suppose, because I was interested in how people lived their lives and conducted themselves and what was going on there. But yeah, unfortunately, I failed that at the end of the year, that module. Well, I failed it. I failed it twice. I failed the reset. So I ended up. I laugh now, but it wasn't funny at the time. I ended up being kicked out of drama school. Ended up on the dole, signing on, and I signed on for 6 months. And at the end of the 6-month period, the dole office said to me, "Right, you either get yourself a job, you bog off because you're not entitled to claim money anymore, or we'll set you up with some voluntary work." So the easiest option seemed to be voluntary work. And I signed up with an agency at the time called CSV, Community Service Volunteers, who did placements across the whole of the UK. And I got sent to a school to work in a school. And I remember it to this day. It was a school for maladjusted teenagers.
Right.
Who had been in trouble with the law, who weren't attending school, or whose families felt that they couldn't look after them any longer. And cut a very long story short, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I suppose for the first time ever, I felt that I belonged somewhere. the kids, and there were kids from the age of 10 all the way through to 17. They seemed to respond to me, whereas they would play up for a lot of the other staff or teachers. For me, we had a bit of a laugh, we had banter, and they responded. And I can remember many a journey taking them back to their homes for Christmas or for holidays, and having my eyes opened to some of the backgrounds that they came from. And at that point, I thought, well, this is something I'm enjoying doing. I think I'm relatively good at it, or at least I'm getting somewhere with these so-called maladjusted teenagers. So yeah, I decided to apply for social work. Strictly speaking, knowing very little about what social work entailed, if I'm honest, other than you work with people, and that seemed to me to be ideal. If I could get paid for doing something like that, then that's what I was going to do. So that's how I ended up in social work. And I always thought I'm going to work with children and families and teenagers. I went down to Plymouth, all the way down to Plymouth, to do, at the time, the first ever four-year degree in social work. Discovered that Plymouth rains a lot, and it's a long way from home, from London. And had some negative experiences down there as well because of the colour of my skin. But my time at Plymouth, in hindsight, was very, very good, and I got involved through some of the lecturers in helping to set up the very first Plymouth Race Equality Council. That was my introduction into the kind of the political world of race and ethnicity and identity. And I was the first ever. I was the inaugural secretary for the Plymouth Race Equality Council. So these kind of two things came together. That political awakening, I guess, understanding more about deprivation, about racism in society, reading. I've always loved reading, so I devoured all the textbooks that they suggested, and kind of felt at home. So yeah, 4 years later, and there I was, a qualified social worker. Went back to London to work, and my first ever job was with they don't exist anymore, the Family Rights Group, working in the East End. And at the time it was a brand new project, Horizon project, supporting refugees and asylum seekers who had literally just arrived, and it was about helping them access welfare benefits, housing, language courses, and they would come to the office, and it was just so wonderful to meet these people from all over the world. And then I knew I definitely wanted to be a social worker, because this was just fantastic, meeting all these people and helping them. But understanding their world as well.
Sounds like you had quite a convoluted journey to social work, but I'm sure that all those experiences you had along the way, somewhere in the subconscious, probably helped you get to the place that you knew that you should be, and you find your niche in the world.
I think so. Yeah. I kind of, when I got booted out of drama school, I was at rock bottom. I didn't know what to do with myself. My parents weren't particularly pleased, because I got a full grant at that time to go to drama school, which was amazing. Obviously, I'd wasted that. So that wasn't going to happen again. When I went to do social work, luckily enough, I think somebody must have been smiling down on me. I again got a full grant and all the fees paid. So Yeah, it's a convoluted journey, but a journey that took me into loads of different areas, of geographically, but also kind of socially into the different ways people were living their lives. I can remember one holiday, doing some work for the local council, and going into a family, and they didn't have a bathroom, and they were all using. There were 3 kids using buckets, and entering one room, this cloud of flies came up, and I just thinking, this isn't right. This isn't right. This is the early 90s. This was the early 90s at this stage. Thinking, no, and if I can do something about this, or if I can help in some way, then that's what I want to do.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Thanks. Really interesting. I'm going to ask you 2 questions in one. So listen carefully, but I will.
Well, I remember them, Meryl. That's the
I'll
thing.
repeat them for you. Don't you worry about that. So I want you to think about maybe some of the challenges that you've faced as a social worker in Wales. Obviously, you've come from London now and you're in Wales, but some of those challenges you face because of your ethnicity, because of your culture and your identity. And the second part is, what is the most difficult situation you experienced as a social worker in Wales because of your background and your culture?
If I take that second one first, I can remember being in a team in well, I won't say the name.
No.
And social workers were circulating emails about refugees and asylum seekers, very, very negative ones. I can remember vividly, there was one with a picture of the White Cliffs of Dover, and they'd put on "Go Home" in stronger language than that. And I didn't know what to do. Because as far as I was aware, I was the only person with a bit of brown skin in the whole of the local authority. And it felt very personal, because I've never hidden my roots. I'm very proud of where I come from, and I'm also proud to say I support refugee asylum seeker rights. Even now with the Black Lives Matter, this is political and it's personal. But at that time, I remember thinking, I'm here. This was not long after I'd arrived in Wales. I'm on my own. I don't understand this culture. I came to Wales not knowing anyone. I came because my then partner's from Wales. How do I challenge that? What do I do? So in the end, I can remember writing, not to the team manager, but to sending an email to the head of service and saying, look, this is circulating. I did it very politely. This is circulating, and I don't like it, and I don't think this is right. I think you need to address it, but at the same time thinking, if they find out that it's me who's complained, what does that mean for me carrying on working? How am I going to manage it? And I think it was kind of addressed. It was there was an email, a circular went around about this type of email. The one with the cliffs and the F off written about it. But then I can also remember other times in a different authority hearing people talking about going to the packy shop and or going to the packy shop and coming out and stinking and things like that. And that took me straight back to when I was a kid growing up in Germany. My mum came over from Guyana. We ate lots of curries. We ate lots of highly spiced food because my mum didn't know anything else.
Yeah.
So a traditional Sunday lunch for us was roast chicken smothered in different spices and chilies and onion and garlic.
Sounds delicious. I'm getting hungry just listening to that.
And it was delicious. That was my understanding of what Sunday dinner was.
Yeah.
But I know that our house smelt of those spices.
Yeah.
So when I heard people talking about smelly packies and going to the packy shop and that kind of thing, again, that was really, really personal and hurtful. But I didn't say anything at that time because, again, you think to yourself, I'm in Wales, and although it was, I'd been very welcomed by my then partner and her family, and I was beginning to make friends. It was definitely a different country, and I was trying to get to grips with language, even Wenglish, let alone Welsh itself.
Yeah.
Which sounds, silly, but it was a big thing back then. Even now, I don't understand half of what people say to me Wenglish-wise. I didn't have a clue how Welsh local authorities worked. I didn't have a clue about the politics, the moves towards devolution and what have you. I didn't understand the culture and the history, and I felt completely like a fish out of water. And for a good few years, I did think to myself, I'd made a hell of a mistake in coming to Wales.
What kept you going during that difficult time then? Where did you get your support?
Partly bloody-mindedness.
Okay.
I think determination. When you grow up as the only brown skin family on army bases, and they're pretty tough places to grow up on, and then come into to London. We didn't get army housing, strangely enough. We were the only family who were placed on the local council estate, and that was, at that time, it was pretty rough as well. And that was right at the point of the riots. I mean, the songs "Ghost Town" by the Specials it just sums up absolutely perfectly what was going on at the time. So that shaped my identity, that however I'm going to do it, you ain't getting away with this. I might keep quiet now, but this is, you're not going to beat me. But yeah, I was very, very lucky to have at that time a very supportive partner and family. I didn't tell them what was going on. Right. But they were so welcoming, and they took me to all different parts of Wales and introduced me to lots of things. So I could see that they really wanted me to feel at home. And the other thing was as well, people in Wales are incredibly friendly.
I'm glad you said that. I agree. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, freaked me out to begin with because people would say hello to you.
Yeah.
And when you're walking down the street. Which just doesn't happen in London. Didn't happen at all. So that told me, actually, there's a lot of decent people here as well.
So you're talking about 20 years ago when you came to Wales?
Yeah, about 20 years ago.
Do you think then, Phil, that it's become easier, or maybe it hasn't? I'd like to hear your reflections on it, really. To be a social worker in Wales who comes from a different ethnicity and culture?
I wonder, Meryl, sadly, it's become harder and harder in the last few years because of Brexit, the Brexit vote. And
Right.
whatever your political affiliations, however you voted in that, I think what it did was stir up a lot of nationalism, and dislike or almost hatred of foreigners. There was the Farage poster, wasn't there, of talking about all the Turks coming in, which was, just blatantly racist in tone and content. Personally, I've not noticed it any. No one's been overtly racist to me in a good few years. But I think perhaps if you're younger than me, you're just starting out, perhaps you're a student, you're not as confident or bloody minded. I do think this perhaps is some really tough times at the minute. I think there's been a bit of a backlash against the Black Lives Matter projects and cause, and I think these things are kind of coming together and with a bit of xenophobia attached. So
the final question, Phil, really is, bearing in mind all that you've said, what advice would you have, thinking about all your experiences, for colleagues and social workers who belong to different cultures and ethnicities?
That's a really difficult one, Meryl, because I've tended to do things off my own back and kind of think to myself, you're not going to beat me. This isn't going to destroy me or set me back. What I would say is that you're not on your own, believe it or not. And I didn't believe it when I first came to Wales, because I never met another person with any other skin than white when I first came to Wales. But there are others out there. I didn't go to Cardiff until probably 2 years into my stay in Wales, amazingly, and I discovered different communities there. And then I discovered Swansea also has as well, where I am now. So you're not on your own. In BASW now, we're setting up an anti-racist group, an equality, diversity and identity group, and we're at the very, very early stages, but I'm part of that, and I'm determined that that will be a good source of support if you are feeling alone, if you are feeling isolated. But social work, I'm really lucky. I am really lucky. Social work has been wonderful to me. I worked in Kenya for 2 years with voluntary service overseas. I worked in the States for 18 months. Social work gives you so many opportunities, and actually you'll come across so many like-minded people as well, who are supportive, who are helpful, who bend over backwards to go out of the way to help you. And the thing I guess I would say is, don't be afraid to talk to those people. Don't be afraid to confide. Don't be afraid to ask for help, or don't be afraid to accept help, whatever that looks like. Because I think I've been almost as I've been longer a social worker in Wales now than I was in England, and I do genuinely think, and I hope it's not going to change, but I genuinely think it's still a very supportive profession in Wales. We do things differently in Wales than I ever remember in London. And not necessarily better, but in a nicer, kinder way, I think. And we'll hold on to that.
Well, I think on that positive note, we'll stop, really. But that's been so interesting to hear about that, and I'm sure there are areas that I'm going to find out a bit more about you as well, but on a one-to-one basis, not in front of the cameras. But thank you so much. Diolch yn fawr I chi, Phil. Thank you for giving your time to share your experiences. Okay. What have I done? Okay, let me just stop that. Right, stop recording. Okay, stop.